So this will be for the Board of Health, all these. I see it on there now, the symbol. So I just asked for, I'm just showing that we add just the one item. It's not on, this is council. Okay, for here, that's okay. I just normally don't add some.
Yeah, there's this one here. So there's the village staff. Should be one for
I got it. I would like to begin in 1 minute, please. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I make the time 2 o'clock. That is the start time for today's activities, and I do want to say thank you, council members and staff, and certainly our guests for coming in to get an early start at this rather thick agenda. We have certainly, in a few moments, we'll deal with our Board of Health agenda, our meeting today. Following that, we will get right into our council agenda for this afternoon. And you know the spiel I'll give you. We are televised and web streamed, and if you can make sure your cell phone is silenced, that would be beneficial. Julianne McCauley again is giving up her time to be here to volunteer to broadcast today's meeting, and we thank her. As I mentioned, 2 o'clock. This time we will go to our Board of Health agenda, and I will call that meeting to order. There is one item to be added to the agenda, should council choose. It should be on your desk, a copy of it, the white cover that asks that the following be added as item 3B. This is a report on the hydrogen sulfide Langton well monitoring situation that started Friday. Black has moved and Height has seconded that the agenda be amended through the addition of a staff report respecting hydrogen sulfide air monitoring at the natural gas well in Langton, Ontario, to be considered as an item 3B on the agenda. Any discussion? Those in favor of adding it as 3B, that is carried. Thank you. So we will deal with that. Thank you, Andy. I'll ask board members or any declaration of pecuniary interest to declare. Hearing none, we'll move right along. It's time to correct or adopt the Board of Health minute meetings from our last meeting held June 27th. You'll find them in print from pages 1 to 4. Any comments, questions, concerns on those minutes? Not, I hear none, I will declare that they be adopted as written. Yes, we'll move on. Yeah. Item 3, of course, is our acting medical officer of health update. Dr. Locke, I see, is not here yet. We'll just leave that and move on. And when he comes in, we'll fit him in. That means we will go to 3B. That is the addition to the agenda that we just approved. I have not read this. I believe it was just placed on our desk. So we'll follow through. Marlene, if I can turn it over to you.
Yep.
Not that there's anything wrong with what we're doing. I just have to say I to be brought up to speed here. So we'll listen carefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So first of all, thank you for skipping over the Medical Officer of Health report. He's on his way, so should be here shortly. And I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Taylor as the author of the report, and we'll be happy to answer any questions after she reviews the report with us.
Thank you. Kathy, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So through you to the board.
Susan.
Wanted to walk you through the report in a little bit more detail than we typically would because it has just arrived on your desk. This has been an issue that is emerging as we speak, and so it has been something that we have pulled together just in time for today's meeting. Do want to talk a little bit through this report about the threat to human health that's arising from an emerging issue related to a natural gas well in the Langton area. We wanted to be sure that any mitigation efforts and health and safety of the area residents are protected, and so hence we have brought this forward with very little notice. In terms of recommendations, we are asking for your support in a couple of areas. One would be certainly that you receive this as information, this report on hydrogen sulfide and air monitoring at a natural gas well in Langton. We're also asking that you support our option of the Social Housing Division, provide assistance to the displaced families for temporary housing and food, and that we use some of our resources from the Community Homelessness Prevention Initiative for a period of up to 6 weeks or until such time as the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry has declared that that space, that area in Langton has been remediated and the air quality is safe for residents to return to their properties. The third recommendation that we are making is that the Board of Health, along with the County Manager's Office, provide written notification to the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change and to the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry to let them know about the order to evacuate that has been issued as of today to the residents within the closest radius of that gas well, and request that they expedite the capping of the gas well and place additional sensors at the perimetry of that so that we're able to ascertain whether or not we need to expand, and also to look for them to reimburse any municipal extraneous costs until the issue is resolved. So a few highlights for you as we work our way through that report on page 2, which looks at the introduction and background, just to give you a little bit of information about hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide is a colorless, odorless gas. Colorless gas. It's not odorless. It is the rotten egg smell that you smell, and it is often experienced in low concentrations in our natural environment. At higher concentrations, what you start to experience are burning eyes, you start to experience some respiratory issues, and then that can go on to be runny nose, cough, hoarseness, shortness of breath, and certainly has the potential to lead to more serious health issues over a longer period of time. Back on the 1st of August, we did receive a letter from the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry about some correspondence they had with a homeowner regarding a natural gas well that had begun leaking hydrogen sulfide back in 2015. The homeowners were referred to the health unit from the perspective of some health issues that they were experiencing, and so that was why we got involved. It was their belief that there had been a natural gas well on McDowell Road. So even though there had been some leakage starting in 2015, the homeowners believed that when a gas well that was on McDowell Road that was capped in June of 2017, so in this last couple of months, that exacerbated the issue and that then in fact they were having more serious problems. As a result of that communication, the health unit and the medical officer of health had some communications with the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change and the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, and we looked at what should we be doing to start to monitor what the emissions of that well actually were. As a result of that, there was a sensor that was placed, and at first it was placed closest to the barn. There is a copy of a map of the area that's attached, but you'll see that the barn is closer to the well, the house is a little bit further away. As a result of that monitoring and the subsequent call, what we found was that the concentrations of hydrogen sulfide gas were certainly highest at the barn, higher at the barn than at the house, but even at the house they were higher than what the ambient air concentrations ought to be from a safety perspective. As a result of that, and as a result of some of the ongoing conversations, we have made the determination that the risks to family or to the people who are living in that area are such that the medical officer of health has issued an order to evacuate the premises until there can be a remediation and until that well can be capped and the air quality in the area returns to a level of hydrogen sulfide concentration that is considered to be safe. One thing that is important to note is throughout the reports, and the reports are attached to our board report, so there's a report attached from the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change, is all the way through the levels of hydrogen sulfide that are referred to for very short-term exposures. So from an occupational health and safety perspective, typically we would look at exposures of a duration of 10 minutes, 30 minutes, 60 minutes. In fact, these families are, by virtue of living in that environment, they are exposed over longer periods of time. So the health risks of that are really unknown. So what we are doing at this moment is we have looked at the radius of 400 meters of that gas well, and there are 3 households that are within that radius, and we have issued an order to evacuate to 2 of the 3 households, and we're currently working with the 3rd household to contact them. We have had consultation with legal counsel around what our responsibilities are from a health unit and county perspective, as well as how we can work most effectively with the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change and the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. In our conversations with the Ministry of Natural Resources, they are working at this moment to secure somebody to come and cap that well, but it will take a number of weeks for that to occur, and it could be up to 45 days. One of the speculations is, of course, that when they cap that well, will there be further issues in other wells in the associated area? So we will want to consider that. There is additional information in the report under the discussion section of we have made the offer to the families that we could work with our social housing emergency shelter program, because we are asking people to leave their homes for potentially up to 45 days, and what might that look like and how might we support them through that from a housing and temporary accommodation perspective. We did look at other alternatives, and so those are there, and we did opt not for those for a variety of reasons. We did feel that it was appropriate to offer the emergency housing and some support in that way, and that one other option was that we do nothing and offer no support, so we didn't think that that was appropriate. And then there may be potential other considerations there from a perspective of employment. One family is employed on site. And then the other option that we've considered, but we haven't gone down this path, would be that Norfolk County declare this an emergency situation and pay for the capping of the well. The estimate by the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry is that that well will cost approximately $200,000 to cap. Consultation, you'll see towards the end of the document the list of people with whom we have consulted, and it is certainly quite extensive, both within the county as well as externally with Ministry of Natural Resources as well as Ministry of the Environment. And then later in the report, and I won't go through it, of course, but you will find in the appendices there's a map of the location of the residence as well as the gas well and the barn that's in question, as well as the reports that are coming from the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change. There's one that's dated August 10th, and that was a result of the monitoring that was set closest to the barn. And then the second one that's dated August 16th, which was as a result of the monitoring that was set closest to the house. So with that, I will pause and be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Susan, and there will be questions, and while it's on my mind, I want to say many of us were notified of this Friday afternoon. I believe that was the 18th, if my memory is correct. And Susan, I want to thank you for the work that you've done, and I'll have another comment when we're over and done here. Councillor Wells, please. Or Member Wells, I guess is the proper
You
term.
can call me anything you want, because I've been called.
Member Wells.
Thank you very much. And certainly do want to also offer my congratulations for the way that the staff has handled this. And I do have two questions. As I listened to your presentation, you have issued an order to the residents to vacate. Now, and it could be up to 45 days, possibly. Now, just for clarification, we have issued the order, they are to vacate. Are we financially responsible, or are they responsible? Who's paying for that? Do you know that?
So if I may, through the chair to Councillor Wells, so you're referring to their accommodation
Yes.
needs during that period of time. We have made the offer to use the emergency housing resources to provide some support to them if the need arises. Up until this time, the families we've spoken with have been staying with family members, so they may choose not to take advantage of that, but we did feel in good conscience we didn't want anybody to be in a situation where they felt they had no alternative but to stay there. I think what we're proposing is that we would be interested in the Board of Health supporting our communication to the Ministry of Natural Resources and the Ministry of the Environment to recover any of the costs that we may incur, so that we could use those resources for others in that similar predicament.
Well, thank you for that, for offering that olive branch to them, and then they have the option to decide. My other question is, you mentioned capping the well as a possibility, and if we did that, we meaning Norfolk County, there was a cost of approximately $200,000, and that would be our cost, and would we be able to recoup that cost from someplace else?
So again, if I may, through Mr. Chair to Councillor Wells, it is my understanding that that if we were to cap the well, we wouldn't necessarily be guaranteed that we could recover that cost. And therefore we would need to be prepared to cover it and then potentially recover. At this moment, the Ministry of Natural Resources has committed to capping the well and has committed to covering the cost.
Okay.
But there will be about 45 days potentially before that can happen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Oliver, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks, Susan, for your report. I have a couple of questions similar to my colleague across the table. What obligation, if any, does the owner of the property on which the well is located have in this kind of situation? To either be responsible for capping or share the cost or whatever, first of all.
So if I may, through the chair to Councillor Oliver, or to Member Oliver, it is my understanding that as a result of the, can you remind me? Abandoned Works program, the property owners are actually not responsible for this. They have given that responsibility to the Ministry of Natural Resources.
Okay, thank you for that. And my second question for now, Mr. Chair, relates again to the families that have been directed to evacuate their homes, and when they have, from the sounds of it, albeit staying with family, which is good to hear. In 2 weeks, of course, children will be having to go back to school. Do you know, and are you able to share with the board, the families that have been affected? Do they have school-age children? And if so, are there contingencies being talked about for those children to be able to attend school, and at what expense to get them to school if they're not at their normal home?
For sure. And again, if I may, through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Oliver, there is certainly the potential for us to support that. We have not yet begun to have conversations with those families about school-age children. They do have school-age children, but about their return to school. We will certainly do that, though, in the coming weeks. And if that is something under the emergency shelter program, that would be an opportunity there to say if there's additional transportation costs, for example, then that could potentially be supported through that program.
And it is relevant. You did inform us at the bottom of the first page of the report where you talk about reimbursement for any extraneous costs. So the costs of supporting these families would be considered among the extraneous costs that we should be eligible to reimburse. Okay.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Columbus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Susan, you mentioned that the M&R is going to look after the cost of capping this, but who actually owns the well or the wells in that area? Is it the property owner, or is it a company that drills wells? Or
Wrong way? There we go.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. I turned on or off instead of on. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Columbus, through the Abandoned Works Program, the property owner, it's my understanding, actually sort of signs over ownership of the gas well to the province. So the province would technically be the owners of the well.
Okay, thank you. And I take it that this is a farm property, you mentioned barn. Any livestock or crops involved where someone has to work the land?
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Columbus, there's no livestock. There are some family pets that from an accommodation perspective, we've considered that in the order to evacuate. So there's no livestock involved. I do believe that there are some crops, but I'm not fully aware of the details of that at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Height.
Thank you, Chairman Luke, and through you to Ms. Taylor. It's mentioned here on page 2 that there's speculation that the McDowell Road West well, when it was capped by MNRF, caused this problem. Will there be an investigation as to who is actually responsible for this?
So through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Height, we will absolutely want to have that conversation because our concern, of course, is that if that is in fact true, and if capping one well created an issue somewhere else, our concern would be if we cap this well, will we then have a concern somewhere else? So we'll want to be able to have an understanding of what's the broader anticipated reach of this issue.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, you mentioned 45 days is the window, so these people are going to be displaced for basically 2 months, is that correct?
That is my understanding from the Ministry of Natural Resources, given the complexity of capping a well in this circumstance, then the need for them to secure the appropriate resources to do that. We will be asking, we have asked already, and we will continue to ask if there is any way they can expedite that process, because of course we want to minimize the disruption.
That would be nice, thank you. And another disruption is, somewhere in your report here, it says they run a business out of that.
Yes.
So they've effectively shut down the business, but it doesn't mention the reimbursement there. Is that something that they'll take care of, or how does that work out?
And through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Height, that is a concern, and as yet we have not had that conversation with the family. Our first concern was ensuring that the family was safe, and now we will begin to have those other conversations.
Okay, so during the talks, you'll be there, MNRF, and the family and all that will be brought to the table?
That's correct, and my understanding is at this time they have shut down their business that is run out of the barn because there are concerns, of course, of being there. The other concern is that with hydrogen sulfide gas is that at a certain concentration it does become flammable, and so they are operating a business that involves welding and other types of equipment that could be a spark, so we wouldn't want that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sonnenberg.
Mr. Chairman, I wonder if you could tell us how this differs from people who, from a health issue, how this differs from people who have sulfur in their wells, in the water in their house. I mean, I can take you to places today where the barometric pressure is what it is, where the color of the water resembles ink, and you can smell the place when you drive in the driveway. It is highly sulfur smell, but people have lived there forever, generations, and they just seem to put up with it. So is there a higher concentration here that makes it a further health issue, or what are we dealing with here?
Perhaps, Councillor, I can answer that, or try to. We're dealing with a gas here. This is hydrogen sulfide rather than sulfur. Many of the wells are contaminated with or have high levels of naturally occurring sulfur, colloidal sulfur. And in fact, one of the issues that we're dealing with this particular site is that there's the water that's associated with the well as well is also has a high concentration of sulfates, sulfides, and the chemical breakdown products of the hydrogen sulfide gas that's bubbling through it. So coming back to your question, some wells do have a level of hydrogen sulfide in them, but it's not permeating in the air to a level where we would be concerned about respiratory problems. It's nasty stuff to have in the well, and sometimes the only way you can get rid of it is by a reverse osmosis plant attached to the well. But the sulfur that you get, colloidal sulfur, is not the same thing as we're talking about here. This is a gas that is a byproduct of sulfur, but it's hydrogen sulfide, so it's a different product.
Thank you, Mr. Brenton.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. Through you to Susan, and I apologize, Susan, having my back to you, but I went through this report as quickly as I could, and I may have missed something, but I'm on page 4 of 8, and it says here the property owners may decide not to abide by the order to evacuate. Can you answer that? Like, how many did and didn't? Did I hear a number?
So through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Brunton, we've included that in the report because in some cases when we issue an order to evacuate, and if the order, the family or the people don't comply with that, then there could potentially be taking somebody to court over it. What we're saying in this case is that we've issued the order to evacuate in support of the family in their pursuit of looking for some solutions through the Ministry of the Environment. We are concerned about their safety. We've conveyed that, and we'll continue to take that sort of an approach as opposed to pursuing through legal channels. So we wanted to include that in the report in the interest of being fully supportive and full disclosure.
Well, again, I may have missed it, but how many people are we talking about?
So at this point, there are 2 families. There are 3 in total. We have spoken with 2 families, and 2 families have, in fact, left the premises. The 3rd family, we're in the process of working through that with them. There's been a change in ownership of the property, and so it took us a little bit longer to track them down, and so we are working through that.
So, sorry, back up for a minute. 3 owners, 3 properties?
3 different households, yes.
And how many people?
That I'm not 100% sure. I could certainly find out for you.
Well, I guess that will, if, on that same page, you indicate that if they've left and go with relatives or whatever, we would still accommodate them with some form of meals, etc.?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we wanted to provide that as an option to families. They may choose to stay with relatives, in which case there would be no housing cost and that sort of thing. The offer for resources through that homelessness program was to provide for some support for an incremental cost. If somebody needs to live in a hotel or a motel, then the incremental cost of eating in restaurants versus purchasing their groceries, that sort of thing. That program would also be providing or have the potential to provide if there were additional costs around transportation of school-aged children to school, that sort of thing. So we would want to meet with the families on an individual basis to discuss their circumstances.
Well, I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. I'm just, we're under no legal obligation to do it, correct?
That is my understanding, correct.
Okay, and have you, I assume we could recover these costs where you have them in your, you mentioned the social housing budget funding portion, or am I correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Brunton, there is budget in the social housing and the homelessness program. What we would be looking to do, though, is that any expenditures that we have under that budget, because of course it's a limited budget, we would look to recover those from the Ministry of Natural Resources so that the money would continue to be available for others in the community if they were to find themselves in a circumstance where they needed it.
Okay, and my last question is, have you talked to our insurers about this? Like, I assume it's something we didn't expect, and nobody has, we didn't bring it upon ourselves, so I'm wondering, like, would our insurance company have any coverage on that?
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Chair, actually, I'm seeing that Mr. Cripps has a
Mr. County
comment.
Manager, response, please.
At this point in time, it's certainly the position of the corporation of Norfolk County that liability does not attach. We have a statutory duty as exercised by our good medical officer of health to inform people when we are aware of a health emergency. He has done that, has issued an order to evacuate. The two things I want to make abundantly clear are, at this point in time, as far as we're aware and to the best of our knowledge, we have no legal obligation. We may well have a moral obligation to step up, but there is no legal one at this point in time. Accordingly, it's certainly premature, if not entirely inappropriate, to consult with our own insurance. We do hope the affected families have some private insurance of their own on their homes and or businesses. And to be abundantly clear, all of the advice we're giving you is suggesting that we would like to, and we do think it's appropriate to approach Her Majesty, either through the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change or Her Majesty through the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, to ultimately make the county whole for any monies that it does forward. But we cannot guarantee, and we do not guarantee that in fact they will do so. So if this Board of Health chooses to support the staff initiatives, the staff advice, to make these offers, there is some potential exposure ultimately to Norfolk County itself. We would seek compensation. We would suggest that's appropriate. We suggest to Her Majesty that's appropriate. But there is no guarantee, because it isn't self-evident as to whether any order of government has any obligation whatsoever, and that would include both us and Her Majesty. So that is not settled. We think it's fair, it's reasonable, and we can make a good case, but there is no guarantee, so there is some risk.
Well, I appreciate that, but you know, we're here to help people. I guess we're here to help people. That's what we try to do every week, I assume, but I'm just wondering if at some point here we should get some opinion from our insurers. If we get into this, are we opening up any can of worms that we might come back to haunt us at a later date? That's all I'm concerned about, so thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Geisens.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I got a call last Thursday from this gentleman saying that he had some problem with hydrogen sulfide. I don't know whether he had talked to the health department or not, but what he was concerned with at the time was that he had some employees at the barn and wondered what to do. And I know he had a business and everything there, so I guess the question is there compensation? I don't know what he was what he's actually making, or whether it's carpentry or vegetables or whatever. I have no idea. But do we know? And the number of employees that were there?
So through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Geisens, are you referring to the same family, or is this a different person?
The same family.
It's the same family. So we haven't had conversation around employees and compensation that might be available to them. What I can say, though, is, you know, certainly from an employment perspective, the organizations that we've spoken to have all suggested, so I mean the Ministry of the Environment, the Ministry of Climate Change and Natural Resources, and ourselves in the county have all suggested that they would not be comfortable in employees being exposed to that level of hydrogen sulfide without personal protective equipment.
So it's been taken care of? In other words, has that barn been shut down for occupancy?
It has.
Thank you.
Mr. Black?
Thank you, Chairman Luke. Well, what I don't understand is it seems that Norfolk County is treating this far more seriously than the province is. And so I'm not really understanding. The two don't mesh. So on the one side, I'm thinking, well, the province, 45 days to cap this well. Do they have the same numbers that we have? Like, I'm looking at the report here, and it says that it's measured, there's different numbers in here, but the house at 194, the barn at 263, and then the back page does give some, risk numbers and parts per million, and refers to 1,000, being kind of the nasty threshold. So, through you to staff, is there actually kind of a safe threshold number that has been established? You know, thousands, it seems to be, parts per billion seems to be the upper limit, but we're measuring at 194 at the house and 263 at the barn. So is there another threshold lower than the 1,000? That means it's, and is that what the province is basing their 45 days of seriousness on?
I'll try to answer that one again. The numbers that you've got in these tables here are a little bit complicated because they're quoting some different standards. There are standards in the United States that come from the Association of Industrial Governmental Hygienists, and there are air quality standards that we have in Canada, and also there are these EAGLE measures. On the next page, if you look at it, you'll see the EAGLE 1 there is defined as a concentration above which is predicted that someone's going to have symptoms. So, and that is 1 part per million, which places them in the EAGLE 1 standard. All of these numbers, without getting in, they're different numbers because they're weighted averages over time. So when it comes down to it, what we're really looking at is numbers that are greater than 1 part per million are likely to cause symptoms, especially in people that are compromised in respiratory compromised or have asthma or are elderly or whatever. So the 1 part per million is the one that we're looking at as an AEGL standard. And most of these, as they say in the summary of their report, in summary, the concentrations observed at Langton are well above any air quality thresholds set out by the MOECC, and concentrations have exceeded air standards and upper risk thresholds, as well as US AEGL1 values. So really, pardon? It's in the report. Okay,
So if I may, Mr. Chair, it's in the appendix, it's page, the very last page in the
Very
report
last
from the
page.
Ministry of Environment. Councillor Black. There you go.
It's
Have my
there.
copy.
It's the very last paragraph. That's the summary issue that you really need to be paying attention to, because those are the limits beyond which we look at as having symptoms. The one big issue that's not covered in this report generally is the fact that although when we look at these values, the values are over time. As I say, they're time-weighted, and you have short-term exposure limits. You have a time-weighted average exposure limit, which is the limit that people could work at in a normal 35-hour week. But in the final analysis, we don't know what the chronic effects. There's nothing in the literature about continued exposure. These people have already been exposed with unknown levels for the last at least 6 weeks to 8 weeks, 2 months. They have noticed themselves, the people that are living, the residents there, have noticed themselves that this is increased in their symptomatology has increased over the last 2 months. So from my perspective as a medical officer of health, once I know that these values, there were no values taken until I requested them, so that there were no values from the MOE and no values from the Ministry of Natural Resources prior to the time that I asked them to set up some sensors. So basically, once we have those numbers back and we know they exceed the recommended values, then we have to take some action, because further exposure, especially unknown exposure, not a continuous exposure, can go up and down, as is in that report you can see on the graphs. Once we know, and once I determine that there's a risk to health, I have to remove people. I have to either remove the source or remove the people from the source. So that was the reason that the order was given.
And I really appreciate that, because it makes it a lot clearer to me that Actually, I believe that we, and through you, our medical advisor of health, are being more responsible than the province. Like, I don't understand the 45 days. If this is a serious matter, they should be getting at this immediately. And for us at the lower level to have to ask the upper levels for that information, it should be coming from them, not from us and up. Anyway, thank you.
I have a recommendation here that deals with 3 paragraphs of recommendation is found on the first page of this staff report. It goes like this, that staff recommendations of report HS 1721 respecting hydrogen sulfide air monitoring at a natural gas well in Langton be approved. I'm not going to read the entire. And could I get a mover and seconder for that, please? Councillor Black has moved, and Councillor Geisens has seconded. And of course, the 3 things that are in there is number 1, to receive as information. Number 2, to provide some assistance in the way of funding for temporary housing and food for these 2 or 3 families that have to evacuate. And finally, number 3, that our county manager's office, along with the Board of Health, notify our Ministry of Environment and Climate Change and also the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry to expedite the capping of this well. So that's something we don't have any control, but we can certainly try to turn the heat up on. Any discussion on this? Councillor Height, please. Or sorry, Mr. Height.
Thank you, Chairman Luke. I'm just wondering, normally when we send letters like this, we would send one CC the Premier, CC our local MPP. Will that be done? Because as the way it's written right now, I don't see that. I think it'd be good to inform
Mr. County
them.
Manager, is that?
It will be done.
Yeah, that will be done. Thank you. If not, those in favor? It's carried. And just a closing comment on this. Again, as the county manager and Susan has mentioned in her report, we're not under any legal obligation as a council to do what we're doing, but certainly morally, I agree with the county manager that this is indeed the proper and right thing to do in this type of situation. And I do want to, I was going to do it under other business, but I'll do it right now. I do want to thank again our health unit, the health board, for their actions today, the health unit staff. Our fire department took a very good role on Friday in moving on top of this. Senior staff was involved. Of course, Dr. Locke, thank you. And our Roads Division of Public Works was involved too in making sure that our citizens are safe and hope that we don't run into any more gas leaks. This is serious, serious business. And I know that it was handled most professionally by our staff. You wish to just chime in?
I've only been employed here 4 months. I worked at 2 much larger municipalities with far more human resources. And let me say how exceptionally impressed I was with people out in roads who reacted instantaneously, the fire department who knew to ask the right questions and to sort of cut through to the point, with public health unit that got it right away. And in fact, we had this document from the province and they realized that was something that required action instantaneously. And then worked fairly seamlessly together, 3 entirely different areas of our corporation that really have nothing to do with each other. So this is my first involvement with sort of an emergency situation here, and I was exceptionally impressed and very proud to call these people my colleagues now. This went every bit as well as places with 2, 3, and actually one's got 10 times the resources we do. I've worked at toe for toe, every bit as good, if not better. This was really well handled, and people really rose to the occasion on Friday, and since, frankly. They've worked all weekend.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Locke, welcome. Do you wish to give us a report?
Mr. Chair, I really don't have anything else. We've been subsumed by a lot of this. I can tell Board of Health that we've had no significant outbreaks. We have the usual respiratory and enteric, but nothing else, luckily, in the community this month.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Let's go to our committee reports. We have one before Susan Taylor again. She has in a package on page 7 a staff memo. This is the operational audit information slash recommendations for the Board of Health. So Susan, when you're ready, you can lead us through it, please.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, to the Board of Health. The report that's here on page 7 is around our audit recommendations and the update around our variance report. Is that the one? Sorry. Just want to make sure. Am I one ahead of me? It is. Okay, sorry. It is around providing some information to the board. And so what we've done is in the last meeting, for the first time, we did provide some variance reporting to our advisory committee and now to you at the board. So on page 9, what you'll see is our year-to-date as of June 30th found that our budget was 5.2 million. Our actual expenditures was about 4.2 million, with that remaining $1 million sitting in variance. What you'll see, though, on the table on page 10 is where does that variance come from? And that variance is coming from a number of key areas. The first one is around salary and benefits, and so you'll see that about half of it is coming from salary and benefits, so $539,000. In part, that money would actually be because of the timing of when payroll is processed. So about half of that would be coming from the remaining June payroll that wasn't included in that catchment of this particular report. The remaining gapping dollars that are there, we have made some arrangements to use some of that to advance some of the work that we have not been able to advance because of some of the vacancies that we've had within the health unit. So we expect that by the end of the year, we will have largely closed that gap for salary and benefits. The second area that you'll see in this report is around materials and supplies. And so you will see that there have been some materials and supplies that were underspent in the first 2 quarters of the year. And for some of those, we would expect they will remain underspent, which will be a good news story from a levy perspective. And then there will be others that we do, again, it's a timing issue. So some of it, for example, might be program supplies that are purchased on a regular basis. And so the next main purchase would be happening in the future. And then the third area was around services, generally speaking, that we provide in terms of sharing and providing some in-service training for our staff. And so there was a variance in the first 2 quarters, or the first 2 quarters of the fiscal year, and we will see that is closed as we go through in the year. So we will certainly be within budget in this calendar year, and we could, in fact, be a little bit under budget. So this was the first time that we provided a report of this nature to our advisory committee and to our board. What we would envision is that we provide these on a quarterly basis. If there are any suggestions around what folks might like to see in the report that aren't there now, we'd be happy to add them in, or if there's information that's included in the report that is superfluous, we'd be happy to streamline it. So with that, I will pause and answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Susan. Mr. Wells?
Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to congratulate staff's efforts to come in, and if I heard it correctly, that we are on target. Hopefully we will be under budget or just on budget, and I say to them, I hope that happens. And if it does, I'll offer you my congratulations at the end of the year. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Height, please.
Thank you, Chairman Luke. Through you to staff, I noticed on page 11, you're saying here gapping dollars have been allocated to temporary positions to fulfill accountability. And when I look over at the page before that, salaries and benefits, there's a variance of $862,000. Is that the salary gap?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the salary gap is $539,000, and so you're correct. So salary and benefits is higher, but just the salary. So the salary and benefits variance is $862,000. The salary only portion is $539,000.
Okay, so out of the 539,000 of the gap, like how many positions are we talking that aren't being filled right now? That seems like an excessive amount.
So if you look just, if I may, through you, Mr. Chair, if you look just at the 539,000, that's salary only, a portion of that would have been a timing issue in the sense that when this report was run, the second pay processing for the month of June wouldn't have come out of it. So there would be about $200,000 that has not yet been, or had not yet been posted to this. So that would decrease. So the actual gap is about $300,000. We did for the first half of the year, we were without some of our key leadership positions. We do routinely have turnover within the unit itself where we've got staff who are off on a leave and so need to be filled, and it takes a bit of time to backfill them. And then the third reason is we've had a few people who have retired.
Okay, thank you. Now, if a position becomes vacant for so long, what's the time period before you just say it can't be filled and look for something else?
Yeah, if I may, through you, Mr. Chair, it's actually not, in most cases, it's not a single position that's been in that situation. We have had a few positions where we have had to, from a recruitment perspective, we've had to recruit more broadly. So before we would say it can't be filled, we would say, what are some other tactics to recruit? So are there other channels to recruit? We've tried recruiting through the LIN and through other areas, and we've been quite successful. Actually, we have our two managers who are with us here today, which is very exciting. And then in other cases, it is a case of just needing to have the opportunity to interview, offer, and then have the employee leave their current place of employment.
Okay, thank you. Now, my next question through the chair is, under materials and supplies, your telephone bill is the highest of all bills. Even your promotional materials, operating supplies, program supplies, medical supplies, it's still way over. What steps are you taking to reduce that, and why is that bill so high?
So through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Height. So that would include, I believe, and I would need to go back and to check whether that is including both our business landlines and whether or not it also includes cellular phones. And so certainly from a business landline perspective, we do have round about 100 employees, and so or 82 FTEs. So there is a substantial cost there. And if it does include, I will need to check though whether or not it includes cellular telephones, and we do require employees to have access because they are often out in the field.
Okay, now, do you know if that's down or up from last year?
That would be what the budget was based on last year, so I don't know, and I could find out though.
Thank you for that.
Mr. Brunton, please.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. Just very quickly, Susan, on page 10 of your report there, you show the annual budget, and you show, the expenditures, total approved budget with a staffing of 82.95. But then the next section up until June 30th, you show no staffing. I think on a quarterly basis, it would be nice to see the actual figure of employees in there, in that center column, as we move forward, because that tells us how many employees are not available to your department during those quarters. Shouldn't be hard to fill, should it?
No, and through you, Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor Brunton. I think that's an excellent idea, and we will certainly include that in the next pass of this report.
Thank you.
Mr. Black?
Thank you, Chairman Luke. Through you to Susan, just wondering, you're asking for some advice on how to tweak this or what else the Board of Health might want included. What about last year's numbers at the same time? It's always interesting to compare last year to this year.
And if I may, from a clarification standpoint, through you, Mr. Chair, are you referring to last year's year-to-date at this point in the year, or, okay, good.
Yep.
For sure.
So, year-to-date.
Yep, happy to do that.
Anything further? Moved by Mr. Black, seconded by Mr. Brunton. The staff memo regarding the operational audit implementation of recommendation 1.8 information provided to the Board of Health be received as information. Any further discussion? Not those in favor? Carried, thank you. Communications. There are 6 items of communications. I'm going to read the motion. If you wish to address any of those 6, we will do so. It's been moved by by Mr. Brunt, seconded by Mr. Height, that the correspondence items A through F be received as information. I'm not going to read them. They're there. I have read them. Are there any of those 6 that you wish to make a comment, ask a question about? Hearing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? That 2 is carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Andy. Any other business to come before this board? I see Geisens and then Oliver, please.
Thank you very much, Mayor, for letting me do this. I'm looking at the very first thing that came off the new, that we had on the hydrogen sulfide. And what bothers me some degree is that it says air monitoring of natural gas well in Langton. It is actually between Silver Hill and Langton. To say it's in Langton, I think, is misleading. So I don't want to set somebody saying, oh, we got problems in Langton. It's not in Langton. It's basically between Silver Hill and Langton. So if we're going to put that in, I don't want that in the press that there's a problem in Langton.
Near
Thank
Langton.
you. Near Langton, yes.
Mr.
A
Oliver?
lot closer to Silver Hill than it is to
Near
Langton.
Silver Hill.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I get to my point, just on that point, when Councillor Columbus showed me on the map the location, I mean, as one is traveling east or west on that concession road down into the valley of Big Creek, where you cross Big Creek, there is chronically a hydrogen sulfide gas smell. So if that's the vicinity of where this well is, I mean, this has been a problem that's been there for decades, obviously, at least as you're driving the road. So I'm going to make a point myself, Mr. Chair, of going over if they'll let me through the road closures, although I guess the roads are open again now. But I do think that has been a problem there for a long time. Mr. Chair,